The train screeched into a stop, steam billowing like ghosts along the empty platform. Charlotte Hayes stepped down with a gloved hand gripping her worn leather satchel, her heart drumming beneath layers of lace and borrowed hope. 6 days ago, she had boarded in Pennsylvania with nothing to her name but 2 modest dresses, a widow's brooch from her mother, and a letter proposing marriage from a man she had never met. She had pictured a sturdy man with a gentle voice and a hand ready to catch hers the moment she stepped onto the prairie soil. She had rehearsed her smile in the window's reflection and even practiced how to greet a child. She knew the man had a son, but there was no one waiting. No tall rancher with open arms, no child hiding behind his legs. Only a thin breeze and a hunched woman in a sun-faded shawl, eyes squinting through the dust. "You Charlotte?" the woman asked. "Come on then. We best get you to the Walker place before dark." And just like that, Charlotte's dream began to unravel before her boots had even touched the dirt road out of Silver Hollow. Charlotte tried to sit upright despite the jostling of the wagon, her spine aching from days on the train, and now another hour on rutted dirt roads. The prairie opened wide in every direction, flat and silent except for the low groan of the wheels and the wind whistling through scrub grass. Beside her, an elderly woman in a faded shawl adjusted a jar tucked between her knees. "Elias Walker ain't much for talking," the woman said suddenly, her voice cracked like dry wood. "Not since his wife passed." Charlotte flinched at the word. Wife. That detail had never appeared in any of the letters. The wagon crested a small rise, and the homestead came into view. It wasn't much, more a weather-beaten suggestion of a house than a proper home. One of the porch posts leaned like it had given up, and the front windows were half covered by torn curtains, flapping in the breeze. A rusted pump sat dry by the side of the house, and a chicken coop with no chickens leaned sideways in the yard. This wasn't the start she'd imagined. The wagon halted with a jerk, and Mrs. Abernathy climbed down, knees popping. The front door creaked open, and a tall man filled the frame, Elias Walker. He was broader than she'd expected, his shoulders heavy with work and time. His face was worn, carved with years under the sun, and his eyes, gray and unreadable, met hers without a flicker of warmth. "Elias," Mrs. Abernathy called. "This here's Charlotte Hayes, the woman from the letters." His jaw tensed. "I didn't write those letters." Charlotte's grip tightened on her satchel. "But they were signed by you. My wife wrote them, before she died." His voice was low, rough like gravel under a boot. Silence dropped heavy between them. Charlotte stared at him, trying to understand. "She arranged the marriage?" "She did. Thought it was the only way Liam wouldn't grow up alone." Mrs. Abernathy stepped in. "She traveled 6 days to get here, Elias. You gonna turn her away?" He looked past Charlotte, toward the horizon like it offered some kind of answer. "She can stay, in the bunkhouse, that's all." Charlotte forced her chin up. "I don't want your charity, but I've nowhere else to go." "That's not my problem," Elias muttered, then turned back inside. The bunkhouse sat behind the main house, an old storage shed converted into living quarters. Inside there was a narrow cot, a rusted stove, and shelves sagging under dust and cobwebs. Charlotte set down her bag without a word. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that tears never changed a thing. Instead, she took off her gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and started cleaning. By sunrise, the stove was scrubbed, the window washed as best she could, and the floor swept free of mouse droppings. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Hunger was an old companion. Outside, the yard was quiet. No dogs barked, no cows lowed. It was a farm in name only, silent, brittle, and tired. That's when she saw him. A small boy, no more than 6, sat on the porch steps of the main house. He had a mop of blonde hair and a wool jacket 2 sizes too big. His knees were pulled up to his chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Charlotte approached slowly. "Hello there," she said gently. "You must be Liam." The boy looked up with wide eyes but said nothing. He just stared, solemn and wary. "I'm Charlotte. I came to help." He didn't answer, just lowered his eyes again and began scraping his boot against the wood. She stood there for a moment, awkward and unsure. Then she gave a soft smile and backed away. She wasn't wanted, not by the father, not by the son. And yet here she was, Later that morning, Mrs. Abernathy returned with a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth and a small tin of honey. "Man doesn't always know what's good for him," she muttered as she handed it over. "But I reckon you're made of stronger stuff than most." Charlotte gave a quiet thank you. Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped the loaf. The smell of warm yeast nearly undid her. She tore a piece off and ate slowly, trying not to cry. She wouldn't cry. Not in this place. Not in front of anyone. "Is he always like this?" she asked finally. "Elias?" Mrs. Abernathy shook her head. "Number used to be softer. Before the drought, before the debts, before she got sick." "She?" Charlotte asked. "Grace, his wife. Sweet woman. Strong too. Held on till the end. But when she knew she was going, she made him promise to send for someone. Someone who wouldn't just leave." Charlotte looked down at the crust of bread in her hands. "So he did what she asked. But he doesn't want me." "Men like him forget how to want anything at all," the woman replied. "But that boy needs someone. And this place needs a fire lit under it." Charlotte nodded, more to herself than the old woman. She hadn't come this far to be turned into a ghost. She finished her bread, stood, and looked out over the land. A ranch in ruin. A widower buried in silence. A boy locked behind grief. She wasn't afraid of hard work. And if they thought she'd quietly fade away, they had another thing coming. The wind blew hard that morning, tugging at the eaves of the bunkhouse as Charlotte stepped outside, sleeves rolled and hair pinned tight. The prairie stretched out under a pale sky, silent but watching. She walked toward the barn with a steady gait, determined to face the day like she belonged here. Because if she didn't act like it, no one else would believe it. She passed Elias without a word. He was chopping kindling near the porch, the sound of his axe sharp and final. He didn't look up. Inside the barn, the air smelled of mold and dry hay. There were only 2 cows left, ribs faintly showing, and a broken wheelbarrow leaned against the wall like it hadn't moved in months. Charlotte pulled on gloves, found a rusted pitchfork, and began cleaning the stalls. There was no instruction. No thanks. "No, you don't have to do that." Just silence. But she didn't mind silence. Not anymore. By noon, sweat streaked her back and straw clung to her hair. Her hands were blistering already, soft skin cracking under the work. She welcomed the sting. Pain was something she could understand. Liam watched her from a distance, always just out of reach. In the morning, he'd sit on the porch steps, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes sharp and cautious. When she turned his way, he'd vanish inside like a rabbit down a burrow. Charlotte didn't chase him. She left little breadcrumbs instead, offering an apple from her own tin, carving a wooden figure during a rare moment of rest, leaving it on the step without a word. She didn't expect thanks. She just hoped he'd begin to see her as something other than a stranger. Elias, meanwhile, barely spoke. He rose early, worked the land, repaired fence posts, and disappeared into himself by dusk. The grief hung on him like an old coat, stitched into every part of his day. And yet, even in his silence, he noticed things. Late one afternoon, he stood by the gate, watching her drag a sack of feed to the chicken coop, alone. He didn't offer help, but he didn't stop her either. That night when Charlotte returned to the bunkhouse, she found a tin of salve and a strip of linen left on the doorstep. No note, just acknowledgement. She smiled even though no one saw it. 3 days passed like that. Quiet labor, sidelong glances, and cautious breath between them all. Then came the 4th night. The wind howled louder than before, rattling the roof and whistling through the cracks in the bunkhouse wall. Charlotte lay awake under a threadbare quilt, listening. She could hear the barn door slamming loose and knew she'd never sleep unless she checked. Wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, she stepped out barefoot and crossed the yard. As she reached the barn, she heard a second pair of footsteps crunching behind her. It was Elias. "You shouldn't be out," he muttered, tugging the barn door shut with one hand while fastening the latch with the other. "You shouldn't leave your barn open in a wind like this," she shot back, pulling her shawl tighter. They stood for a moment in the lamplight, 2 shadows in the cold, wind slicing through the silence between them. "I didn't expect you to stay," he said finally. "I didn't expect to be sent to a place where I wasn't wanted." His jaw tensed. "You're not unwanted. I just..." Didn't ask for me. I know. She softened then, voice quieter. But your wife did, and she saw something in me. Maybe I'm not what you imagined, Mr. Walker, but I don't plan to leave. Elias looked at her then, not past her, not through her, but directly at her. Charlotte, you deserve better than this place. She held his gaze. Maybe, but this is where I am, and I'm not afraid of hard things. He gave a short nod, then turned back toward the house. Before stepping away, he said, there's coffee on in the mornings, if you want. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next day brought no miracles, but a shift hung in the air, small, almost imperceptible, but real. Elias set out an extra cup on the porch railing. Liam lingered a second longer before retreating, and Charlotte found herself humming quietly while feeding the chickens. In the afternoon, she took a walk to the edge of the property, wanting to understand the land that had become hers, even if only in name. The soil was dry, cracked in places, and littered with broken tools and forgotten fence lines. Weeds choked the old corn rows. It was clear this place had once been something better. She knelt down and ran her fingers through the dirt. It wasn't dead. Not yet. Charlotte stood, brushing off her skirt. As she turned back toward the house, she saw Liam watching from a distance, half hidden behind a tree. She didn't speak, didn't wave, just gave him a small, knowing smile, then kept walking. Behind her, the boy stepped out from behind the tree and followed. The morning sun rose pale and cold, stretching long shadows across the frost-kissed fields. Charlotte wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped onto the porch, surprised to find a cup of coffee already waiting by the railing. Steam curled gently from the tin mug. She glanced toward the barn. Elias was already out working. She took the cup in both hands, letting the warmth bleed into her fingers. It wasn't a gesture of affection. Not yet, but it was a shift, and that was enough. Liam appeared moments later, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the dirt at his feet. He mumbled something too soft to catch. I'm sorry, Charlotte said gently. The boy glanced up, only briefly. You made the chickens follow you yesterday, he said almost accusingly. Charlotte smiled. Maybe they like my humming. He gave a tiny, reluctant shrug. Then, like a spooked colt, he disappeared back inside. But she'd heard the shift in his voice. Curiosity, not resentment. Another crack in the wall. That day, Charlotte ventured deeper into the heart of the ranch. The land was worse than she'd feared. Parched, tired, abandoned in places. She passed rusted tools half buried in soil, broken plows leaning against collapsed fences. The wheat fields, once golden and proud, were now patchy and dry. But her eyes weren't looking for signs of ruin. She was looking for possibility. She knelt again, sifted a handful of soil through her fingers. There was grit, but also give. Moisture clung just beneath the top layer. The land wasn't dead. It had just been ignored. That afternoon, she brought it up to Elias. This place isn't lost, she said as he brushed the mud from his boots near the porch. You've got runoff from the northern ridge. The soil holds better over there. If we shift some planting to the higher ground... You've walked the fields? He interrupted, surprised. She nodded. I didn't come here to sit around hoping someone else would fix things. Elias studied her a long moment. Grace used to say the same thing. Charlotte's voice softened. She sounds like she was wise. She was, he said quietly. Strong. When she got sick, she made me promise to finish what we started here. But when she passed, his voice trailed off. I didn't know how to carry it all alone. You're not alone, Charlotte said. Then a beat later, you don't have to be. He gave her a long, unreadable look, then nodded once before walking away. But the next morning, a shovel leaned against the bunkhouse door, cleaned and oiled. A silent invitation. Over the next week, a rhythm began to form. Charlotte fed the chickens, checked the soil, took inventory of the supplies that still remained in the old tool shed. She started a small journal of what might grow here if things were done differently. Potatoes, maybe. Beans. Something hardy. Liam began leaving drawings for her, childish sketches folded and left on the step. A stick figure beside a chicken. A crooked house with smoke spiraling from the roof. She never asked if they were from him, and he never admitted it, but every time she found one, she smiled and tucked it into her apron pocket. It was late on a Sunday when she found the letters. She had gone into the main house to return a pie plate Mrs. Abernathy had left earlier. Elias wasn't home. He'd gone to the east fence line to mend something. On her way out, a gust of wind swept a stack of papers from the desk in the parlor. She bent to gather them. That's when she saw her name, Charlotte Hayes. It was in a letter, not one she'd written, but one she hadn't seen before. The handwriting was neat, feminine, steady. She picked it up and read, Elias, she deserves the chance to build something good. If I'm gone, and you're too proud to write her again, then send this one. Send it with your name if you must. Just give her the life we couldn't finish. It was signed, Grace. Charlotte sat down hard on the edge of the chair. Her hands trembled. The woman who had written her had done so knowing she wouldn't live to meet her. She hadn't been a placeholder. She had been chosen, invited. The tears came, unbidden and unstoppable. Not because of the pain, but because for the first time since she arrived, something had finally made sense. That evening, Elias returned late, clothes dusted with prairie dirt. He found Charlotte sitting on the porch, the letter folded in her lap. I read it, she said, her voice steady. He didn't ask which one. He just nodded. I left it out on purpose. Charlotte looked up at him. Why? Because I figured if you'd read it and still stayed, maybe we had a chance. A chance. The word hung in the air between them, tender and unsure. She didn't reply, not in words. She simply stood, handed him the folded letter with care, and said, Tomorrow I'll start clearing the upper field. We'll need rows marked before the first frost. Elias gave the faintest smile. Then I'll get the mule harnessed before sunup. And just like that, the land wasn't the only thing beginning to wake up. The first sign of trouble came with dust. Not the usual kind that rolled off the dry prairie in gusts, but a rising column, steady and thick, hoofbeats beneath it. Charlotte spotted it from the north fence line, where she and Elias were staking out rows for winter vegetables. Elias stopped mid-stride, jaw tightening. Briggs! Charlotte shielded her eyes. The man you owe? He gave a single nod, then headed for the gate without another word. Charlotte followed, every instinct prickling. The way Elias walked, shoulders squared, hands clenched, told her this wasn't just about debt. It was about pride, about something older, sharper. Harlan Briggs rode in like a man who believed the land already belonged to him. His coat was too fine for ranch work, black and slick with silver buttons. Two men flanked him, both rough-looking and armed. Liam peeked from behind the porch post, silent. Briggs pulled his horse to a stop and tipped his hat, but there was nothing polite in the gesture. Afternoon, Elias. Still scraping by, I see. Elias didn't flinch. You've got something to say it. Briggs clicked his tongue. I was hoping we could talk like neighbors, but I see you're still in that mood. He turned toward Charlotte, his smile thin. And this must be the new missus. Word travels fast, you know. Mail order bride, was it? Can't say I blame you. A man needs company, especially when the roof's caving in. Charlotte met his gaze without blinking. I'm Charlotte Walker, and I believe your business is with my husband. Elias shot her a glance, but said nothing. Briggs laughed. Spirited, I like that. Then he leaned forward in the saddle. I came to remind you, Elias. You missed your last payment, which means the next one's due early. You've got 1 week, or I start collecting. We had an agreement, Elias said through clenched teeth. 30 days. Briggs shrugged. And now you've got 7. With that, he yanked the reins, turned his horse, and rode off. His men followed, their eyes lingering too long on Charlotte. That night, the kitchen table was silent, except for the clink of spoons against bowls. Charlotte had made stew with the last of the potatoes and some wild herbs she'd gathered from the west slope. It wasn't much, but it was warm. Still, neither of them touched their bread. They're going to take the ranch, aren't they? She asked. Elias didn't look up. If I can't make the payment, yes. How much? Too much. Charlotte pushed aside her bowl. Let me see the ledgers. He hesitated. You let me clear your fields. You let me mark your rows. Let me help with this too. A long silence passed before he rose, went to a drawer and pulled out a worn book bound in cracked leather. He slid it across the table. Charlotte opened it and immediately saw the problem. Overdue seed costs, livestock feed debts, repairs long ignored. But what caught her attention were the numbers scribbled in a separate column. Donations to the local church, supplies given to neighbors, fees paid for others' land disputes. "You've been trying to help everyone," she said softly. Elias looked away. "Didn't seem right to watch folks go under." Charlotte's fingers pressed into the page. "And now it's your own land that's about to be taken." She closed the book. Her mind spun, gears clicking fast. "There's something we can do." The next morning, Charlotte walked into the center of Silver Hollow with a purpose in her step. She wore her best dress, simple but clean, and carried a basket filled with patch samples and sketches. The town wasn't much, just a few storefronts, a livery, and a church whose steeple leaned east. But it had what she needed: women with idle hands and growing worry. She found them at the general store: Mrs. Keating, the Reverend's wife, and 2 ranchers' daughters. Charlotte set the basket on the counter and began to speak. "Winter's coming. If Briggs gets this ranch, he'll carve it up and sell it off. You know that. But we still have time." Mrs. Keating frowned. "Time for what?" Charlotte pulled out a sample, a quilt square stitched with simple but elegant embroidery. "What if we sold these? Quilts, baby blankets, table runners, things we can make together. There's still a mail coach that runs to Wichita, and from there to Kansas City. If we act fast, we can ship enough for holiday markets." One of the girls laughed. "We're not businesswomen." "No," Charlotte said, "but we're survivors. And if you'd rather watch men like Briggs take what's left, then do nothing." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Keating reached out and touched the fabric. "It's good stitching." "I'll teach what I know," Charlotte said. "All I need is time. And your hands." By week's end, the barn was filled not with silence, but with voices. Women laughing, whispering, working by lamplight. Elias stood outside the doorway one evening, arms crossed, watching as Charlotte moved between them, pinning patterns, threading needles, praising even the crooked seams. "You turned my hayloft into a sewing circle," he said dryly. Charlotte didn't miss a beat. "You'll thank me when the orders come in." He raised an eyebrow. "And they will?" "They already have," she said, holding up a slip of paper. 24 quilts to Kansas City. Down payment received." He took the paper, read it twice. "How did you—" "I used your last name," she said with a smile. "Turns out Walker means something in these parts." Elias looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, the weight in his eyes seemed to lift. "I underestimated you." Charlotte shrugged. "A lot of men do." He laughed, a low, genuine sound. Then softly, "Thank you." "You're welcome," she replied. "But we're not done yet." And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch, the first flickers of hope returned to the land. Autumn settled over the plains in a hush of golden smoke. Mornings came cold now, breath visible in the air, and evenings ended with the hiss of kettle steam and the creak of wood stoves coming to life. In the barn, the women's sewing circle had quieted, the last batch of quilts tied and packed in crates bound for Kansas City. It was Charlotte's final shipment before the first frost. On one such morning, Elias stepped onto the porch and found Charlotte already there, coffee in hand, wrapped in a worn shawl that used to belong to Grace. He paused, studying her, how naturally she'd come to belong in this space, how her presence no longer startled but soothed. "You were up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." She offered him the other mug she'd poured without asking. "The wind makes me restless." He accepted the cup, nodding. They stood in silence for a long time. "Liam's been drawing again," she said eventually. "He left me a picture last night. It was the 3 of us, standing in front of the house. I think he sees me now, not just as the woman who showed up." Elias looked down into his coffee, jaw working. "He calls you Charlotte. I noticed. He used to call Grace Mama." Charlotte's voice dropped. "He doesn't have to call me that." But Elias turned to her then, something unreadable in his gaze. "Maybe he wants to." The silence stretched between them, thicker now, weighted with something tender. Charlotte didn't look away. "And what about you, Elias? What do you want?" He didn't answer right away, but then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges, worn from handling. She wrote this the night before she died, he said quietly, handing it to her. Said I wasn't to open it until you arrived. I almost didn't. Charlotte opened the letter slowly. Grace's handwriting was strong and neat, even as her body must have been fading. Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means you came, and for that, thank you. Elias is stubborn and slow to trust, but good to the core. He needs someone who will fight beside him, not just for the land, but for the quiet parts of himself he never shows. If you can love him, really love him, you'll both survive this world better than either of you would alone. Grace Charlotte folded the letter with trembling fingers. She really knew us both, she whispered. Elias didn't speak, but when she looked up, he reached out, slow and hesitant, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. It wasn't a kiss, but it felt like the beginning of one. Later that day, Charlotte helped Liam stack firewood. He worked in serious silence, his small hands mimicking her motions as best he could. After the fifth trip, he stopped and looked up at her. "Do you miss your mama?" he asked. Charlotte knelt to his level, surprised by the question. "Every day," she said honestly. "She taught me how to mend, how to cook, and how to keep going when life didn't want you to." Liam thought for a moment, then said, "I think Mama sent you here." Charlotte blinked back sudden tears. "I think maybe she did too." The boy leaned forward and hugged her, quick and clumsy, but real. And for the first time since arriving in Silver Hollow, Charlotte allowed herself to cry. The peace didn't last. It was late afternoon when the first curl of smoke rose over the west ridge. Charlotte spotted it from the barn and shouted for Elias. He came running, shotgun already in hand. Liam was inside the house. Charlotte rushed to him and bolted the door behind them. Then came the fire, crackling, hissing, fast-moving. Flames licked up the outer fence line, dancing across the dry brush. The scent of kerosene was unmistakable. From the hill, Briggs's men watched, torches still in hand. Elias fired a warning shot into the air. "Get off my land," a voice called back. "You had your week, Walker. Time's up." Charlotte ran to the sewing crates and threw open the lids. "Get the blankets. Use them to smother the flames." Elias didn't hesitate. They dragged the dampened quilts, stomping out the fire as it leapt toward the barn. Smoke stung their eyes, blackening their lungs. But they moved like one, fighting for what was theirs. Then from the tree line, a figure stepped forward. Harlan Briggs himself, revolver at his hip. "You should have left when you had the chance," he snarled at Charlotte. "This land was already dying. Now it burns." Charlotte stood tall, chest heaving. "Number you set it ablaze because you couldn't own it." Elias leveled his shotgun. "You come one step closer, Briggs, and I swear." But the shot didn't come from him. It came from the ridge. Sheriff Dobson, flanked by 2 deputies, rode hard into the clearing, rifles drawn. "Drop the gun, Harlan." Briggs froze. "Been hearing things," the sheriff continued, dismounting, "about threat." The land smelled of ash and frost, an odd combination that spoke of both endings and beginnings. It had been a week since the fire. The soil near the west fence was still scorched black, and smoke lingered faintly on the wind. But where there was ruin, there was also rebirth. Charlotte knelt in the upper field, her gloved fingers pressing fresh seeds into the tilled earth. Beside her, Liam worked with quiet determination, carefully covering each row with dirt. His tongue peeked from the corner of his mouth in concentration, and she smiled. "Straight lines," she reminded gently. "I know," he replied. "You already told me. Twice." She laughed. "Well, third time makes it stick." From the barn, Elias emerged, sleeves rolled up, face streaked with dust and a thin line of sweat. He carried the last of the salvaged fencing and set it beside the post Charlotte had marked earlier. When he looked up, their eyes met, and this time, there was no hesitation between them. Just shared purpose. "Southfield's ready," he said. "We'll start planting there next." Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and stood. "Then we'll need another pair of hands." Liam raised his hand. "I'm strong." "You're also 6, Elias teased. "I'm 6 3/4, Liam corrected. Elias ruffled his hair, and the boy didn't flinch. That alone said everything. The townsfolk of Silver Hollow hadn't forgotten what happened that night. Harlan Briggs sat in jail awaiting trial, and the sheriff had made a public statement about investigating land fraud and arson across the county. But more than justice, what spread was the story of how Elias Walker and his mail-order bride fought back and saved their ranch. Orders for quilts kept coming. Charlotte taught new stitching patterns to the younger girls and bartered hand-sewn mittens for eggs, soap, even nails. The sewing circle had become a fixture in town, and more than a few women had started bringing their husbands along to help repair barns and dig wells. Hope was contagious. One afternoon, Mrs. Abernathy arrived with a bundle under her arm and a sly smile. "Thought you two might be needing this," she said, laying out a length of ivory fabric with lace trim. Charlotte blinked. "Is that my wedding dress?" the older woman said, matter of fact. "I haven't worn it in 50 years, and it won't see another church aisle unless it's on someone younger and better postured." Charlotte reached for the fabric with careful hands, overwhelmed. "Mrs. Abernathy, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me braid your hair come the morning," she said briskly, "and don't you dare try and shorten the hem." The wedding was small, just the townsfolk, the church bell, and a patch of wild prairie daisies Charlotte had picked at dawn. The sun was high, the sky bluer than it had been in months, and not a single cloud marred the day. Charlotte walked down the short aisle between hay bales, her dress catching the breeze, her smile soft and trembling. Elias stood waiting in a clean shirt and borrowed jacket, Liam at his side holding a small bouquet he'd made himself. Wildflowers, sticks, and a drawing rolled into a scroll. When the preacher asked who gave the bride away, Liam raised his hand. "I do," he said proudly. Everyone chuckled, and even Elias cracked a smile. The vows were simple. No grand declarations, no poems. Just two people agreeing, quietly, fiercely, to build a life out of everything they'd survived. "I never expected you," Elias whispered as he slid the ring onto her finger. "But I thank God every day you came." Charlotte blinked back tears. "I didn't come for salvation," she whispered back. "But I think I found it anyway." The kiss was brief but full. When they pulled apart, the town clapped, and someone rang the bell loud enough to scare the birds into flight. That night, under a sky filled with stars, they sat on the porch as a family. Liam curled between them, fast asleep with his head on Charlotte's lap. A thin blanket covered his small form, and in his hand, still clutched loosely, was the drawing he'd gifted her after the ceremony. It was a picture of a house, not the old sagging one they lived in now, but a fixed-up version, bright with curtains in the windows and smoke coming from the chimney. 3 figures stood out front, one tall, one in a dress, and one small with arms outstretched. Charlotte traced the lines with her finger. "He sees it all so clearly," Elias nodded. "So do I." She turned toward him. "What happens now?" "We live," he said. "We build. We raise him right, and we do it together." Charlotte leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "No regrets?" He shook his head. "Only that I didn't meet you sooner." The wind rustled through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The land was still, but not silent. It was alive again, healing. Charlotte looked out across the fields, some burned, some bare, but all ready to grow. As the fire died down and the stars rose over Silver Hollow, a new beginning took root, one built not from promises, but from choice, courage, and quiet love. But now, we'd love to hear your voice. What would you have done if you were in Charlotte's shoes, arriving to silence, yet choosing to stay? Leave us a comment and tell us, what moment in this story stayed with you the longest? And where in the world are you watching from? Whether it's a snowy town in Montana or a quiet cafe in Istanbul, we'd love to know where this story found you. If this tale stirred something in you, consider giving it a like, subscribing for more Wild West stories, and sharing it with someone who believes in second chances. Until next time, may your roads be open, your heart steady, and your next chapter waiting just beyond the horizon.